Okay, continuing from where we left off, we were talking about strategic thinking, and now I'm going to talk about a few things that can get in the way when trying to do this. So the first thing I've noticed that a lot of people do is, well, first of all, they tend to allow their emotions to sort of take over, and so due to this short-term emotion, they create a sense of urgency. And I feel that this sense of urgency just kills all clarity, mental clarity, and it can create sort of a fog in front of you, which is honestly, there's nothing worse than that if you're trying to strategize and trying to execute on a plan or execute on some sort of, you're trying to build something. So you want to try to, as robotic as this sounds, you want to try to avoid allowing your emotions to get in the way. Don't allow yourself to feel a sense of urgency. If this is happening, if you feel like you're in a hurry, that means you probably need to go back to some of the previous steps and look at your planning and make sure that you have the resources that you require, whether that's time, money, human resources. Maybe there's just something missing in your plan in and of itself. And so at least for me, I tend to get anxious, or I feel urgent whenever things aren't going according to plan. And a lot of times I have to tell myself, take a break, take a step back, zoom out, as we talked about before, and reassess the entire project, sure, or reassess which part you're working on. But one thing I would definitely urge someone to do is always get your problem solving out of the way. Don't let it linger. Even if it seems like a small thing, in my opinion, it can only grow. I would try to get it out of the way so that it doesn't create a worse outcome for you. So another thing that I used to do in the past, and I've learned not to do this. In fact, I do exactly the opposite now. I would say it's overcomplication. When you're strategizing, this isn't about we're not getting deep here. We're not trying to get as deep as possible. We're trying to be as useful as possible. Okay, so we're trying to use our resources as efficiently as possible without overburdening any one part of the structure, any one part of the system. And so the more you overcomplicate things, obviously the more overhead you have, the more you have to be looking at everything at all the time. And I find that, there's obviously no reason to do this. I mean, in fact, cutting the fat, if you will, or cutting out what you don't need is only going to help you. It's never going to harm you. And worst case scenario, if you've removed something that you feel is crucial to your project or to the game or to what it is you're working on, then you can always add it back later, and you can recomplicate things with that particular part. And then the third thing I would like to sort of hone in on a little bit here is, we all have our own blind spots, but I would say try to figure out where those lie and try to be aware of yourself and aware of your weak points. And, a word that I don't like, assumptions. Try to be aware of your assumptions and make sure that you're not assuming something or taking something for granted when you're working. So being aware of your blind spots, while it may seem difficult, it's something that you have to, you have to assess yourself, and you have to assess also the weak points of the project itself, or the strategy that we're working on. And when you do that, you actually, again, we talk about patterns. You will start to learn what types of things can get in the way, and you'll learn how to not to overcomplicate things, and you'll learn about your weak points, and you'll probably learn not to make assumptions when as at least as little as possible. So one thing that I tend to do in order to sort of combat against these pitfalls, the things that are getting in the way, is to write things out visually. Okay, so then you have something that not only can you refer to later, but I feel will eventually embed itself in your subconscious, and it'll help you to remember what it is you're doing, and it'll help you to be more efficient and more strategic in the way you're approaching whatever task it is you're working on. So what can you use to write things out? Well, you could literally write it on paper, but I mean, what I find is common in a lot of places is using a whiteboard. Just get a big whiteboard, put it somewhere, put it on the wall if you can, and write things out there. That way everyone that's working with you can also see it, so it's available to them. And I feel like the mind muscle memory of just writing things out is very helpful. This is something sort of lost on people these days as we use technology to accomplish these things, which does bring me to the next thing that I often like to use are things like Notion or any sort of management or any sort of program that allows me to manage my tasks and what I'm working on. Notion is a great place to do that. There are a lot of free resources out there. There are paid resources that can be used when you're collaborating on a larger team. So I would look into those, and you can do mind mapping. You can look into how mind maps work. I'm not going to explain that here. So those are the top three things. So writing it out physically by hand, typing it out somewhere, or copy and paste it, whatever, it doesn't matter, somewhere, or creating just a mapping of everything that you're trying to do. Now, for me, mind maps sometimes are a little bit overcomplicated. So I do I do sometimes avoid those because I'm not sure that they're always helping, but a mind dump is usually useful for me, where I'm just kind of dumping out all the things that I think that are necessary and reassessing, looking at them and actually removing as much as possible. I don't like to add things. I like to remove things. I think streamlining things, I don't know what word to use, but basically keeping things as lean as possible is ideal. So then it's less to think about. And that sort of alleviates that overcomplication I mentioned earlier. It'll also help you to plan out better, which means you'll be using your resources better. And that short-term emotion of urgency that I also mentioned will also be alleviated because you'll now be, you have a clear head, clear mind, and you'll be able to see everything in front of you, which is extremely important when strategizing. And another thing that I think is super important is basically, I guess you would call it a feedback loop, or just generally asking at least one outside person. So not someone on your team, not someone that works with you, but asking someone on, like, whether it's, getting feedback on a poll or, just doing questionnaires and things. But you can just go out and ask just generally anybody and say, I did this a lot when I was an engineer, when I wrote code. It's like, what am I not seeing here? What am I missing? Because you're going to spend way more time yourself, and anybody who's, in the loop is going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on, when you could just simply ask someone from the outside and they'll give you an answer. Far more likely, they'll be more likely to be able to help you at least pinpoint where you're missing something. So especially when I'm talking about blind spots, because while we'd like to all be aware of our strengths and weaknesses, well, maybe we're not. And therefore, if you have an outside person who can do that for you or can help you to hone in on that, I would say that's very useful. And the same with overcomplication. It's very easy for someone from the outside to look at something. Maybe they don't quite understand what it is you're doing, but they certainly can help you with, just realizing, hey, you've overcomplicated something here. I can see where this just kind of might be something cyclic or something like that. So those are the things that I would try to do. Okay, so the next thing that I would like to do is take a look at what I'm going to call a 10-hour side hustle. I mentioned earlier that I'd like to go through at least just a made-up scenario, a hypothetical scenario. So we're looking for something you can do on the side, okay? And I'm just going to explain how I would approach that and how I would strategize or create a framework maybe in order to approach that type of or how to approach that strategy, how to strategize, how to create a 10-hour side hustle. So let's make this into a real thing right now. Imagine now, okay, you want to start a side hustle. Okay, so maybe you have a full-time job, maybe you have a startup, I don't know, whatever it might be, but you want to start a startup and you start a side hustle. However, you only have 10 extra hours a week. That's it. Those are your resources there, by the way. So I'm giving a little bit of a hint to where we're going with this a little bit later. You only have 10 hours to allocate. And so I'm going to tell you how I would approach this and how you can approach this like a strategist instead of just diving in blindly. Because that's what a lot of people do. They're just like, I know I want to make extra money. I know I want to do a side hustle. Let's do it. Let's just follow what somebody else did. And that that's all I need to do, right? Because if it works for someone else, it's going to work for me, right? Well, that's not how it always works. So let's take a look at how we can do this. Okay, so let's start by using the system that I sort of explained up until now, which step one would be then to zoom out. So what's the bigger picture? What's the bigger game here? Okay, so what does that mean? I mean, what question are we really asking? Well, the first question you're asking is, what is my goal? What is the goal here? Okay, so we want a side hustle. We want it to only take up 10 hours because that's all we have. And we'd like to, let's say we want to make $500 a month. Or rather, let's ask ourselves the following questions, like how much do we want to make? So what are we asking here when we zoom out? Okay, so what's the goal? So you can ask yourself a number of questions. Is it to make $500 a month? Is it to build a brand or build yourself up as a brand? Is it to build a new brand? Is it to just test a business idea for the future? So without knowing the bigger objective, you're incapable of taking any action, right? If you did, it would be completely at random. So that's what we mean by zooming out. We're just saying decide what. Okay, again, let's use like a game. We're going to use the word game here a lot. I guess is what I'm saying. I'm not gamifying the situation. I just think it makes sense. The terminology makes sense to me. So define what winning looks like before you play. So you're deciding what success, if you will, looks like before you begin. Okay, so that's what you're doing with zooming out. So once you've answered this question, and again, I would write this down. For me, what really can be disappointing is when I come up with a really great idea and I know that I want to do it, and then I forget what it is. I mean, I don't know if that's happened to you, but I'm sure it should be common enough. And so while you don't always have the ability to write something down, I'm just saying, like, don't hesitate. If you have an idea, just write it down really quick. Or you can just type it up, or I mean, if you have, I don't know, a smartphone, you can use one of the AI assistants there, or you can use ChatGPT or something. Just really quickly make a voice memo is what I'm saying. Just make a voice memo, write it down, and then once you've done that, you've already kind of started what I said earlier, which is sort of mapping things out and writing things down. Okay, so the next step, as we've discussed earlier, is connect the dots. Okay, so what moves the needle? What gets things going? We've now decided, we've asked ourselves what it is that we're doing, what our objective is, what our goal is. So, okay, now how do we approach that? As a good strategist, you have to ask yourself always, what actually drives results? Or what creates results? And so, or rather, not what creates the results, but like, what is your drive? I guess it might be the way I should put that. So if it's money, then that means you need an offer. If it's attention, you need a platform, right? If you don't identify 1 to 2 of the most powerful levers here, you're going to waste half of your time. So basically, you have to identify where is the pressure point that turns effort into results. Okay, so where it is that we have to apply pressure, what is it that we have to do that we're using our effort as efficiently as possible and we're creating the most results, because that'll help you that'll propel you forward, firstly. Now, again, making sure that you've planned this out and decided what it is you're doing. Once you've done that, now start applying pressure there, and then you'll notice that you're getting results, and then you can look at the results. Okay, so you shouldn't ignore the feedback you get from those results. Again, get some outside eyes looking at this, or figure out some way to analyze what those results mean. Okay, so this is something that someone else can do, or it can be a part of your job. I don't know, but that really kind of lies outside of strategizing. So once you've applied pressure and once you've attained results or obtained results, you've analyzed the results, you've looked at what those results might mean. So now you basically are trying to figure out, how can I play this forward? Okay, what happens next? What's my next step? And we've talked about before about playing a few moves ahead. So for example, let's say I'm creating a logo for my brand. If I spend 3 hours of my time today making a logo, does that get me closer to a paying client tomorrow? Probably not. So that's what I'm saying. You have to learn how to define what it is that gets you closer to where it is you're trying to get, and save those things that don't really get you there until later. I'm not saying that these are unnecessary or insignificant. I'm just saying they're far less significant than anything that's not driving you forward. Okay. So instead of spending 3 hours creating a logo, you could spend 3 hours talking to 10 potential customers. Okay. So that could open the door to revenue or obtaining revenue faster than creating a logo would, right? So these types of things. So once you've identified these things, these are your next steps, by the way, but you're also now getting ahead. You're recognizing what's important now, what is important later, and what might not be important at all. Now, while a logo may or may not be important, it is, like I said, far less significant. But what isn't significant, I would say, is deciding, what colors are going to represent your company, or like, I don't know, maybe how you're going to, the interior design of where you work. I mean, I'm not giving good examples because frankly, I already know what to look for usually, but I'm just saying, like, you'll know, especially once you've practiced again and again, you'll know what's significant, you'll know what's important, and you'll know what to focus on. So basically the question I would ask myself if I were you is, what action today makes tomorrow easier and not harder? So creating your logo, sure, is going to make your life easier later because you'll have it, but is it really going to help you tomorrow? I mean, your goal is to create revenue, let's say, and you're never going to get closer. Let's just say, like, you're always going to be the same distance away. Sure, you start at the same distance away, perhaps. Depends on what market you're in. But are you doing something today that will get you closer to that tomorrow or by tomorrow? It doesn't have to be tomorrow. It could be next week, next month. But the point is, what you're working on right now, is it exactly what you should be working on? And you should be able to identify this. So I've mentioned before, once you've done all of these things, you're going to be constantly in this sort of phase. Well, not constantly, but you should be constantly reassessing where you are in the process, what you've accomplished, what that means. Okay. Does it get you closer to your goal? And then let's say it's not, then you adapt. You adapt as you go. Okay. You adapt on the fly, or you adapt your plan if necessary. And that's the other thing, like I've noticed, and I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but people get really, really hung up on the original idea or the original plan. That's a disaster. That can kill your strategy, from the get-go and along the way as well. I mean, while you might have a novel idea, a great idea, it's always makes more sense to pivot when you realize it makes sense to pivot. And I know that doesn't make sense because it doesn't really give you the answer, but you'll know. It's like when you don't see the results that you're looking for, then obviously you must adapt something. Okay. So you should never be just like, I have to do this, right? And it's actually always okay to sort of give up on a plan. So that's another thing I think a good strategist should know to do. And this is part of while you're reassessing, is knowing when to just give up. I'm not saying just give up in general on everything. I'm just saying, like, know when the plan needs to be either revamped or refactored, or just, you got to start over. It sometimes saves time and money to start over, right? So I guess the question you could ask yourself while you're reassessing would be, what worked? Okay. What didn't work? Keep a log of this. And then realize that strategy is the strategy itself, I guess, if you will, or a company. Think of it as a living thing. So the strategy is living, and it's not something that you just set it once and forget. So a system too. It's like, while it would be great, I mean, it'd be utopia for me to create systems that worked and could maintenance themselves, but you have to maintain the systems, right? And you have to maintain your strategy just the same. Because there's everything's changing. The world around you is changing constantly. You have to be aware of the market. You have to be aware of prices, let's say, costs. You have to be aware of expenditures. You have to be aware of what's going on in your team, or generally just, be aware. I mean, awareness is very important. So in order to sort of close up this little scenario here, I think what we should remember is strategic thinking isn't about being perfect. Okay. So, I mean, if it were, then you wouldn't need to do any of the reassessing, right? So it's not about being perfect. It's about asking yourself basically better questions than anyone else. And then act accordingly. So asking questions is great. Coming up with answers is great. Problem solving is great. But without action, you're not going to get anywhere. Okay, so while the strategy in and of itself is just the plan, really, I feel like execution is another big hang up that people have. And that's something I'll talk about later. But, you have to act accordingly. You have to ask the questions. Like, let's say you have a competitor. I mean, you have to be asking the right questions, and you have to be doing it faster than them. I mean, this does create a sense of urgency. So I'm not trying to create that sort of feeling inside of anyone who's watching, but I'm definitely saying that, you just have to be aware of what's going on, because then you know when to make the necessary changes in order to sort of keep ahead of the game. So a quick recap is that basically my point here, obviously, is to give some insight into how I approach things, but also just to sort of, give people not the motivation, but just to make it aware that anyone can develop this type of mindset with practice. So if it's something you're already doing innately, great. Maybe you can use, if you haven't thought of some of the things I've mentioned, you can add those to your repertoire, if you will. But honestly, you can do anything if you practice, right? You can do just about anything if you practice. So I'd like to leave you with the final thought. Strategic thinkers aren't, what do you want to call it? Fortune tellers. Okay. So we're not like, we don't know the future any better than you do. Okay. So, and once you get there yourself, you're not going to be able to you're not going to know what the future brings, but you are going to be better at listening to and recognizing signals that the rest of the world around you doesn't recognize. And so that's what puts you 3 to 5 to 10 steps ahead of everyone else, is you're able to recognize these things far earlier, far sooner than someone else can. And whether that's out of ignorance on their side or not, I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just the point is you're now ahead of the game, and now you have the advantage. Okay, strategic thinking gives you that advantage, and that's what people want. That's what people should want if they want to be successful in their endeavor. So I would like to invite you, if you feel like this has helped you to change how you think, I'd like you to share that with me. You can send me a message, send us a message. Let me know what your current challenge is, because I would love to help you break it down, and then we can try to attack this together. And then we can see if any of the things that I've sort of went over today can be applied somewhere that they haven't been. And like I mentioned, having someone else on the outside take a look at something can only help you. It only saves you time, saves you money. So I'll leave you with that.